A week ago, Representative Feist and I met with around 20 daycare providers, and the goal was to share my draft proposal to protect children from abuse and keep parents informed. And I wanted to get feedback from providers themselves, because we shouldn't regulate people before listening to the people we're regulating. We also hope to gather information from providers on how we can make their jobs easier and reduce their costs, because daycare is something that's ridiculously regulated, and we can do a lot to lower costs and make kids safer. And I have no desire to mandate anything additional on childcare providers without also reducing their regulatory burden. The last thing we need to do is make daycare even more expensive. I pay $19.45 a month for just one child. And I'm trying to be as transparent as possible by throwing out my ideas in public, because I want to make a law that does more good than harm. And I think this thinking out loud approach is the right way to craft legislation. So please, this is a work in progress, and I want your input as we move forward. Also, requirements will be different for center versus in-home providers, as they already are, because obviously those are very different situations. So with all that said, here's the draft proposal. Number 1, video monitoring and data retention. Requiring one camera in rooms where children are present, with the exception of the bathroom, of course. Any footage must be stored for 6 months, and if there is an incident, footage of that room where the incident occurred must be kept for 3 years. The logic with this, while Small World Learning Center did have cameras, they only kept their footage for a week, meaning they didn't even have footage of the perpetrators fracturing the baby's leg that started all this off. It also meant they didn't have footage of Sybil. Having the footage is the only reason they're getting felony charges instead of just getting fired. And the reason for the 3-year retention for an incident with an incident report is because the law around mandatory reporting of abuse applies to abuse within 3 years. So it'd be good to have footage connected with any allegations there. Number 2, transparency for parents. Parents must have access to the footage within 24 hours of an incident if it happens. And if law enforcement comes to a daycare, the daycare must notify the parents by the close of business that law enforcement was present that day. And what does parents' access to the footage look like? I don't know yet. It could be sent to them, or perhaps only viewable by them within the center property. That still needs to be hammered out, but parents need to have access in case of an incident. And I believe this is good for both the provider and the parents. Like police body cams, cameras will likely exonerate providers more than implicate them, and it'll give parents peace of mind. And this doesn't mean I want to mandate live access. The reason for the law enforcement piece is most families at Small World Learning Center learned about this instance from a Facebook post. Imagine if it was your kid and that's how you found out. It's not how it should be handled. Lastly, stiffer penalties for abuse of children in care. Abusing a child is one of the most heinous acts imaginable, but sometimes perpetrators get off with very light sentences, especially in Hennepin County. I've met with many families with stories that make fracturing a leg look minor. And despite permanent brain damage to their child, the criminal was only sentenced to 1 year. To address this, we need to double the penalty for malicious treatment of a child under 4 from a maximum of 5 years to 10 years in prison. And why do I suggest increasing a maximum instead of a mandatory minimum sentence? Because no matter what happens in the upcoming election, there will still be a Democrat governor, and Democrats are near uniformly opposed to any mandatory minimums. And if a mandatory minimum were to pass, dysfunctional county attorneys like Mary Moriarty might not even prosecute them if the case has a mandatory minimum. And the last thing I want to cover is what I'm definitely not doing. I will not mandate audio recording. I won't mandate anything with greater than 1080p resolution, and there won't be any mandate for multiple cameras per room, as all those things, if they are done, will make it a lot more difficult to comply and more expensive. I'll be hosting meetings in the future to gather more information from providers, and I'll also be hosting meetings to hear directly from parents. My inbox is really packed with feedback from everyone, which is incredibly helpful, but I find conversations in person are much more effective, especially when there's any kind of disagreement. So that's what we're working on. Let me know if you have any questions or anything like that, and let's have a civilized discussion in the comments of this video. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.